First Nations sue Canada over child welfare system's destruction of culture, language.
Here's a summary of the article.
10 prairie-based First Nations are suing the Canadian government over the loss of language, culture and tradition inflicted on communities by the modern First Nations child welfare system. Chief David Crate of Fisher River Cree Nation north of Winnipeg is the lead plaintiff in the proposed class action lawsuit filed January 31 in federal court, the latest in a series of battles over the chronic underfunding of child and family services on reserves and in the Yukon. Crate and 9 other chiefs are seeking collective compensation for alleged community-level harms exacted by the mass scooping of First Nations kids into state custody for more than 3 decades. It proposes to include any First Nation that chooses to join and would cover the period between 1991, when the First Nations Child and Family Services Program was created, and now. 20B already on table for child welfare reform, feds. Following the 60s scoop came the modern child welfare system, the next round of cultural genocide and discrimination toward First Nations, sometimes called the Millennium Scoop, the claim says. The term reflects the tribunal's finding that the number of First Nations kids in state custody today roughly triples the number in residential schools at the height of the system in the 1940s, Cochrane said.
This post received a score of 7,000, with an upvote ratio of 93%. Here are the top comments in response to this article.
Except I suspect the reasons kids are in state custody today is vastly different than it was 100 years ago.
The residential school program 100 years ago came from roots that were utterly racist, designed and implemented to take what the immigrants thought were savage Indians who were heathens and needed language education, math education, civility education, and obviously to dump their religion and history before they ended up in hell. Children died from communicable diseases, sure, but not in the numbers found in residential schools. Thousands of published records show that for many, the abuse in the foster program mirrored abuses in residential schools. Most of the public didn't even know any of it existed until Cheney Wenjack died running away from a residential school in 1966, and the story was fortunately extremely widely publicized and discussed.
The underfunding was the cause in some ways too. The government had, still has, treaty obligations to provide education as part of treaties signed. They didn't want to waste the money, so when church groups started offering to do it for absurdly cheap, they turned a blind eye. It should come up more often that we, by our own laws, have obligations here we have failed to meet to a reasonable standard for generations now.
No race of kid have ever had proper funding in our foster care program. They all suffer. Child welfare systems systematically destroy the culture. The solution isn't complaining or suing the child welfare system and sending more money to remote communities where there is no government oversight. The only solution is significant changes to First Nations communities on both sides. With First Nations communities realizing there is no economic success chances in the middle of nowhere, and the government realizing they have never properly enabled a healthy movement away from an apartheid reserve system.
Here's what I predict to be the best case scenario. 1. They get an apology. 2. They get some money. 3. The kids get enrolled in some cheap online learning program to preserve their language and some culture. 4. Everything else continues to be the same. Mission accomplished.
Get ready to be disappointed. That's the bare minimum IDK if they even get that.
Wait. So parents are unable to care for their kids due to some problem, and the kids go into foster care and they're suing because the people who were able to care for their kids didn't know their ancestral language? How is this our fault?
So a child's welfare is less important than preserving culture.
This video was automatically created by Reddit to speech. The article and comments in this video were selected from Reddit according to their upvotes, and any paraphrasing was performed by smmry.com, without any human intervention.